get upset on the internet.
Hi everybody, welcome to Retro Station 1989. I'm Commander Dan, the lone human inhabitant and also the commander of the Retro Station. And this is License to Play, a evaluation show where we review retro games based on licensed properties. Things like movies, TV, video games, comic books. If it was retro and it was licensed, we review it. We'll tell you if it has a license to play or not. Okay, this is the month of February, a month on Earth when much of the place I'm from is covered in glacier ice and filled with angry miscreants who are just looking for someone to chew out or scream at for almost literally zero reason. This time on our planet is called winter. And in the wintertime, we humans need to express our aggressive tendencies and let off some steam, okay? We do that in many ways, of course. Sporting events like football, video games, of course, and the last way? Kick-ass action movies.
Commander, inquiry, kick-ass action. What type of entertainment is that?
Oh no, I know how this works. I tell you to look up kick-ass action movies. Next thing you know, you'll take over the station with holographic ninja terrorists with cybernetic backpacks and all that.
Commander, I assure you that will not happen. Please give me a place to start my study of this kick-ass action.
Fine. I know. Aha. Check out these series of movies and let me know what you think. It directly relates to what we're going to be evaluating today.
Noted, Commander.
So this week, to prevent me from lashing out at my companions aboard the station, I've decided to blow off some steam and evaluate a game I've only played a bit of, but whose movies I've been a fan of since I was 10 years old. Let's take a look. Action movies. Two words that send the snobs sneering and calling everyone who digs them slobs. And I'm one slovenly slob of a son of a bitch when it comes to action movies. From the greatest of all-time Hall of Fame legendary flicks to the stuff I really like, them hidden sandwiches where it's zombie cop versus zombie crook and they socially distance while they unload Uzis into one another. That movie exists, man. It's called Dead Heat. Or where Chuck Norris uses a motorcycle-mounted rocket to kill terrorists. Yeah, or where all these motorcycles launch their asses into the air to fight the bad guys, or where one lone off-duty cop from New York saves the day on Christmas in the world's largest building in Los Angeles against terrorists who aren't even terrorists, but basic-ass bank robbers. Good God. Action movies are so goddamn good, and it really begins with the 70s and movies like Bullet, and I think it all begins with the movie Enter the Dragon. I know. Action movies are supposed to be American things, but if Bruce Lee isn't one of the greatest Americans and Chinese citizens who ever lived, then I'm a monkey's uncle. Because he is, and I ain't. Moving through the 70s to the 80s and the action genre of film, and we get to one of my favorite flicks of all time. We're looking at a great action director, a man with a great sense of wonder proven by his involvement with Superman and the Goonies, and decided to try his hand at a hard-boiled cop movie, and came up with, if not the first buddy cop odd couple flick in that genre, he certainly perfected the formula like the dude that decided to put the Coke in Coca-Cola. We're talking about the Lethal Weapon series, so let's take a look at the source for the license today and its franchise. Die Hard. Bruce Willis, terrorists, and it's a cop versus crooks action movie that hits hard, has enough wise-ass content to satisfy casual fans, and more than enough intrigue to keep everyone interested, even the snobs who hate action schlock. And around that same time, Richard Donner, he of Superman fame and of Goonies fame and of, The Toy and, Maverick, and look, dude made action flicks like you wouldn't believe, and comedies, and believe me, he melded it all together. It was like magic. The series he created in 1987 will live on as some of the greatest action flicks of all time. Full-on, kick-ass action. It's 1986. Richard Donner was looking to return to the land of the normal after creating a hidden sandwich of a fantasy flick called Ladyhawke. You remember Ladyhawke, don't you? Sure you do. It's that flick where Ferris Bueller helps Roy Batty get back together with Catwoman in a fantasy world of... It's Ladyhawke, remember? Anyway, Richard Donner came back to the real world with a Shane Black cop flick. Shane Black, you may know him from Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or maybe Iron Man 3, and a great Christmas movie. Well, he came up with a great Christmas script about a family with a dad coming to grips with getting older and a widower feeling the brunt of suicidal depression. Except with guns, terrorists, heroin, suicide, helicopters, guns, car crashes, guns, explosions, and Gary Busey. And guns. This is Lethal Weapon, and it's a story of Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh, a wacky pair of cut-ups. Riggs is messy, and Roger's the neat freak. Riggs has a doggo, and Roger's like the dad from Beethoven. No doggos allowed. Boy, never a more odd couple has ever existed on screen. And wouldn't you know it, they're partners. Which in cop terms means they're buddies. Boyfriends in law. They have to get involved with each other's lives, and when Roger's Vietnam pal, our main man detective Ray Cameron himself, Tom Atkins, by the way, comes around looking for vengeance on who killed his daughter, they have to go to work. And who killed his daughter is actually this lady, a hooker named Dixie Wrecked. Whoops, there she is. She's blown up now. Well, okay. Roger and Martin become best friends, save Christmas, and beat the ever-loving shit out of Gary Busey on Roger's front lawn. Folks, if that action doesn't intrigue you, and it doesn't stop here, for 4 movies we see this stuff. Whether it's the racist-ass apartheid pods from Lethal Weapon 2, or the dirty cops from Lethal Weapon 3, or hell, the entirety of Chinatown in Part 4, and Jet Li. This series has driving action, humor, racist-ass Mel Gibson, and saxophone hits for damn near everything that happens. Even when Roger takes a bath, see? People love these flicks, and so did I. It began my lifelong obsession with over-the-top action flicks. And luckily, I was a child of the 80s, and they fed us this high-octane shit until it was coming out of our eye, ear, and bee-holes. Here's a rundown of the stories of each film. Lethal Weapon. Martin Riggs has lost his wife to a car accident. He is despondent, which leads him to be suicidally reckless. Roger Murtaugh, a family man, is just 1 month to retirement and is getting too old for this shit. There's heroin and Gary Busey, and yeah. I kind of take offense to Roger being too old because I'm almost as old as he was in this movie. Still, A+. Anyway, Lethal Weapon 2. Martin and Roger are in a good place. Martin lost his wife but gained a family. They're put on a case to protect accountant Leo Getz after coming across a heist of gold Krugerrands, the money from South Africa. And then they mix it up with a racist-ass apartheid dickwad with diplomatic immunity. And stay tuned until the end for the amusing conclusion to that little fable. A++. Now Lethal Weapon 3. Roger fights gang crime, Martin falls in love, and it all culminates with a bulldozer fight on a construction site against crooked cops or drugs or whatever. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a subplot about inner city crime too. You know what? I give Roger's performance an A+, but the whole movie, it's a bit muddled, C-. Lethal Weapon 4. Roger and Martin are back, baby. The magic is back again. And both have been promoted to captain, but quickly get busted back down to something like patrolman or meter maid or something as they combat illegal immigration and the Chinese triads and the final boss of all the movies, Jet Li. Showing us, in America, the first real good look at Jet Li that we would get. So, and Martin has a baby at the end of this one with his wife. B-. Anyway, when you make an action franchise, you inevitably need to make a video game about it. That's just the law. And believe me, when it comes to licensed titles about action movies, there's only one name, really, in licensing those kinds of games. And we'll talk about them in a moment.
Commander, I have integrated all of the Lethal Weapon films and cross-integrated with the films of Jet Li. I am beginning to understand kick-ass action. I will return soon once my comprehension is final.
Super cool. Margot, wait till you get to Jackie Chan. Oh, and John Wick.
Noted, Commander. Reporting back soon.
10-4, Margot. So, here we have Lethal Weapon for the Super Nintendo, but this is not the only video game based on the Lethal Weapon franchise. Let's look at those first, then we'll evaluate this game and Lethal Weapon by Ocean for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and we'll see if it has indeed a license to play. Hit it, Cambot Jr. What you're seeing here is a segment from Kim Justice's breakdown documentary history of the software licensor and publisher Ocean. And it's a wild story of 80s excess. There were great programmers like Joffer Smith who created kick-ass game-alikes for kick-ass action series. Now, Kim's breakdown of the company, its historical context overseas, and just insight as a gamer who loved the games, even in their crude Spectrum ZX, or Specky, as it's known in the UK form. It's great. You got to check her channel out immediately. That's an order from Commander Dan to all true space pirates. Now, here's a sampling of action flicks that became licensed games through ingenuity in slapping a licensed skin over a version of historically great arcade games and modifying them enough to be more than just a ripoff, which is why I call them play-alikes, but not, rip-off games. Let's take a look at the list. Oh man, we got Rambo, Darkman, Batman the Movie, Red Heat, Rambo, Rambo 3, Cobra. Yes, I know I said Rambo twice, but Rambo's a damn good game. Hook, Hudson Hawk, Miami Vice, Jurassic Park, Navy SEALs, and their all-time biggest smash hit, RoboCop. Pirates, we're going to talk about those, and some we've already evaluated from that list. You might have noticed them. Namely, in our first evaluation ever, we took a look at Darkman on the NES, a game I really love. And folks, I didn't even scratch the surface of these games, but Ocean had a model. And if I'm being honest, it was an amazing and effective model, but here's the issue. Ocean's licensed Amiga versions were translated to the NES very well most times. What you got on the Amiga is what you'd get here in America. But the problem was with time crunch, sometimes they simply translated the Spectrum versions to the NES and the Amiga versions to the SNES in a very minimal one-to-one, or if they were making it specifically for the Nintendo, it was kind of a toss-up as to what you were going to get. Sometimes you'd get a more than decent game, like the NES version of Jurassic Park, or the SNES version of the Addams Family, which was based on the movie. Kinda. But most times you'd get the SNES version of Jurassic Park. Check out my evaluation of that title. In fact, all the Jurassic Park titles. But the SNES one, that's the one that they just overdid it. They tried to do too much with it and didn't hit the nail on the head. I put the link in the description below. That means, of course, Ocean could make good games. Great games, even. But they're a wild card here. Unlike Acclaim or LJN, where most licensed translations required a lot of love for the franchise being portrayed from the player because they were kind of trash at publishing games, if we're going to be honest. But when you saw Ocean's name, you were rolling the dice on who programmed the game and which version it was being translated to know what you were getting, but you were always pretty much sure something good was going to come out of it. Lethal Weapon is not the exception here. In fact, all of the versions of the game run the gamut from dismal to what I'd qualify as passable. But that's really damning it with faint praise without evaluating it, of course. So let's take a look at the also-ran titles based on Lethal Weapon, including a legit hit of a knockoff. But first, I gotta see how Margot's doing assimilating all those action movies.
Hey Margot, you all right? How you doing? How's the assimilation coming along?
Communication attempt acknowledged. Runtime cycle dedicated to integrating the movies of Schwarzenegger, Arnold. Please wait.
Whoa. She's really taking this seriously. Well, Cambot Jr., let's look at the games based on Lethal Weapon and kick this evaluation into high gear.
Okay, Pirates, I want you to imagine a time of the arcades in the U.S. resurging from a long dormant slumber. Street Fighter II had awoken this giant and was devouring quarters like a hungry-ass hippie, and every damn company still making arcade games out there were doing everything they could to drag people away from all the Hadougans and these pipes are broken and get them playing their games. Sega thought this game fighting thing was a genre, so hey, I know what we'll do. We'll make it even more spectacular by creating the Holosseum, a holographic coliseum where 5 fighters, little fakey holograms, would try and convince people to walk away from Capcom's brilliant, structured and balanced fighting game, and instead have this live-action mess of whack controls and hilarious, quote, fighting, unquote. Then there was American Laser Games, which combines 2 of my favorite fucking things, America and lasers. Though shooting at a local repertory theater group dressed like cowboys was not really the future of video games. It might have been. I mean, the shooting was pretty great in the showdown segments, but man, that acting, it'll hurt your eyes. However, Konami, brilliant bastards that they are, didn't want to spend the money on hiring tiny people to pretend to be holograms or pay for the cheese sandwiches the actors of the American Laser Games Guild titles demanded as their lofty fees. They decided to create a shooting game with digitized graphics based on an original concept. Kinda original concept. That game, of course, is Lethal Enforcers. I mean, the Justifier. Look at it. It's based on the 357 Magnum calling up visions of Dirty Harry in your head, and the flyer showing one of the 2 cops you're playing as. One is a Heather Locklear type, and the other, look at that.
Fool, that's a dollar store modern rigs, and if you say otherwise, you're a liar. However, the action in the game? It's fun, fast, and nearly caused America's wussified, pearl-clutching idiot parents to censor video games for all time when the game came to the Sega CD. But at the time in the arcades, you and your pals stood at that big-ass cabinet and blasted away, picturing yourselves as Riggs and Murtaugh taking out street trash in business suits, trying to heist some shit or sell drugs or whatever the hell was going on in that game. I just remember there's a lot of rubber stamp companies. First, this went a long way to proving that the Lethal Weapon franchise had cachet as a big influence to action gaming in the 90s. Not just Lethal Enforcers, but seriously, check out this racing game, Lucky and Wild. The cabinet's got 2 pistols, and you're basically playing, Murtaugh and Riggs. I mean, the game owes as much to Lethal Weapon as it does to Tango and Cash. But this shows that an actual licensed version of Lethal Weapon was being called for in the public mindset. We all wanted one. Enter Ocean. Well, where do we start? Well, let's stay in the arcades. No, there wasn't an official arcade game based on Lethal Weapon the way you might be thinking. But there was this, a thing I won't probably get to talk about otherwise, so I better do it now. Now, we've talked about the Versus arcade cabinets before, which were just slightly altered and coin-opified versions of NES games to whet the appetites of the US audience for the games they were going to be seeing on the upcoming NES. Sort of also to fool us into thinking, the NES was a one-to-one arcade emulating God. It wasn't. But for its own games, Nintendo's own games, it was. After NES was released, arcades and pizza places around the country sprouted this machine. It's called a Play Choice 10, where tokens or quarters would get you 300 time units. That JonTron very, very correctly calls schmeckants, because it's not really seconds. It's a slightly faster second, and they go by pretty quick. And 300 schmeckants is basically 3 minutes, which is, to put into perspective, a super shitty player at Donkey Kong or your average player at Paperboy. And you get that, and you get to browse all the titles. You don't have to just play until you lose your lives. But yeah, it's not the value you might think it is. Now that being said, it's confession time. I am a sucker for pro wrestling games. And pro wrestling on Play Choice 10 got so much of my money at the bowling alley, I'm truly embarrassed to talk about it. When the SNES came out, the Lethal Weapon game was featured in this thing. Now this is the Nintendo Super System, the SNES version of the Play Choice 10, except that it tracked lives and games like a traditional video game, and the games released for it were games plucked from the launch of the game to the end of 1991, early 1992, and was the last arcade machine that Nintendo would ever make. I may talk more about this cabinet one day, but basically it featured Ocean's Addams Family port and other games, and also a game that ties, for my money, with a later version for very worst RoboCop video game ever. That later. For now, this is technically a Lethal Weapon arcade game to talk about, but since this system was almost never seen in public in the US, it almost really doesn't count, does it? Let's go from the grand scale of the arcade to the pocket. A Lethal Weapon version for the Game Boy came out, and like the NES version, there are 3 missions spread out over a couple of areas and follow, vaguely mind you, the first 3 movies of the film series. The first level pits you against mercenaries running guns, rather than drugs and guns from the first movie. And they're in a forest compound and in the Game Boy version at the mall as well. Second level is the untold portion of the Lethal Weapon 2 story, beginning with the bank heist, chasing the guys down to get the Krugerrands, and amidst the Leo Getz stuff, to end up on the South African ship from the second flick at the end of the level. And finally, it's the dirty cops and construction site from the third movie, with a helicopter and stuff. Folks, it's cut and paste, but let's dig a little deeper, just for the moment. I know we're evaluating the SNES version, but let's talk real quick about play-alikes. Around that same time, SNK created a game called POW in the arcades. It was a hybrid belt-scrolling beat-em-up and a shooter that Capcom would grab the format for when they published the Punisher arcade game and Alien vs. Predator. But it's this format on the NES that clicked it for me, the aha moment, that basically Ocean made a play-alike of POW. I mean, let's look at these side by side. Here's POW on the NES, and here's Lethal Weapon. Most reviews of Lethal Weapon here on the old YouTube complain that the punches of Murtaugh and Riggs are significantly more powerful than any of the guns in the game. And yeah, it's the same in POW. The game focuses on fistfights and knife fights rather than shootouts, which, technically, became the approach of the movies too. Riggs and Murtaugh get into more fistfights and brawls and car chases than shootouts from the second flick on. So the NES game is much like the Game Boy version, but we're not evaluating those today. We're evaluating their big brother, the Amiga version port to the SNES. So let's dive in. Well, to start, the manual can't be found online for love or money, okay? I don't know why, but there's just no rule printouts of it for some odd reason. And I'm not paying $40 for a manual. This is not going to happen. The Amiga version's manual can be had if you search for the PDF. And basically here it outlines a game, which plays like a pastiche of the films or like some additional adventures Riggs and Murtaugh had between the movies. Created by folks who were hired to make a Lethal Weapon game who didn't particularly give a shit about the movies, much less like them. There are 3 levels you can take in any order, and a 4th that you have to beat, the other 3 to take on, and then the end game, which has set pieces from Lethal Weapon 3. That's your reward. In the order they're presented in the game, you have the docks, where some kind of expert flim-flam is going on, and you don't want to bring a warrant there, you want to bring a weapon there. Lethal weapon. Okay, fine, I won't make that joke, but yeah. Guns blazing, you fight your way through what looks like a short order cook and blow them away to make the harbor safe for the massive sharks who are abundant and huge. Because that's crazy. And you're going to notice that large wildlife appears more than once in this game. And in fact, in the next level, when you're in the sewers looking for bombs and shit, huge friggin' alligators. This game features 2 more levels, a city and a subway, urban areas which are kind of samey, one where you're trying to rescue Leo Getz. And without the few digitized slides of the people from the movies and the voice samples, and I mean very few of those, it's got like the same music track from the menu throughout it, basically. And the other tracks are pretty good, but it's very scant extra stuff in this game. So, I mean, the game does what it can to keep your interest, but you're going to have to be a special level of Lethal Weapon fan to get to the end of this slog of a game, which is proven by these credits, for crying out loud. Look at that. I mean, RoboCop 3 graphics and sad feelings? Yeah, I'm glad to know who's responsible for all that. So let's just say there's one question left and be done with it.
Does Lethal Weapon by Ocean on the Super Nintendo have a license to play? Nope. No, I'm sorry, sadly, no. This game might brighten the day of Lethal Weapon fans, but honestly, this is a play-alike not of arcade games, but of other Ocean games. I mean, Blues Brothers, Addams Family, relying more on the license to do the work, and the novelty of playing such an adult license on what amounts to a kid's toy. I get the feeling that once Ocean ever made a game, and the programmers knew that it was going to a Nintendo system, they decided to lean on the humor and the cartoony nature rather than the action and the actual license heavy enough. So if you like the idea of a cartoony version of Riggs and Murtaugh fighting crime and shooting their little guns, pick it up. You might like it. But if you can see the gameplay for what it is, go ahead and give it a pass, and more power to you, because it's honestly just an okay game. Hey, Margot.
Yes, Commander. I have assimilated all kick-ass action cinema the Earth has to offer, and I have a request.
Whoa, really? Well, that's new, Margot. Anything. You deserve more than I could give you, but what's your request?
As a synthetic intelligence, I have found a retro game that I would like you to evaluate and share with the sponsors on Planet X.
Okay. On screen. Oh, heck yeah. Now, that makes sense, okay? Next week, we're going to evaluate this title for sure. But in the meantime, everybody, no matter what I've said now on this broadcast, or will say in the future, or have said in the past, remember to always, what is it? Stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. You're a salt adult. Get upset on the internet. You're a salt adult. Throwing out a hissy fit, your views ain't in the millions, and every up and comer is a threat to what you're dealing. And instead of getting better, you just spout upon